All right. So I want to start working with, or from here on out, basically, we're going to start working with a completely different workspace in Fusion. Now, what we've learned so far is all still very applicable, but we are going to start modeling and such with the form workspace. And this is essentially the sculpting workspace in Fusion. Now, before we jump into it, I want to show you some things over here. How Fusion works, or at least how Fusion works with this form workspace, is very similar to other programs, but it is specifically built around T-splines. Now, T-splines is a surface modeling, and think of surface modeling as it's literally the surface. So, like, so far we've been working in solids. Technically, you can consider that as something that is through and through. So even if you were sculpting it, you could consider it like a block of clay. It's a physical thing in virtual space. But T-splines and form workspaces are essentially surface workspaces. Now, there's some kind of in-between, gray area in between, but what I mean by surface is it's literally only the surface of the object. So it kind of, in mathematical terms, it only exists as the uppermost layer. Nothing inside exists inside this model. That's not strictly necessary for this discussion, but it's more of that in plane working, you can have a physical like sheet of paper plane, but this, instead of just like a piece of paper where it can only be folded and twisted and such, this can of course be more like metal where it can be stretched, compressed, all kinds of expanded on, but you can also still extrude off of this, twist, manipulate, all kinds. It's very expressive, really. Because, and I mean that expressive intentionally, in that you can just freeform with this. Yes, there are of course very detailed ways of working and ways of working back and forth that you can make work more architecturally, but the form workspace is intended to be much more of your sculpting space. We've been working through sketches and extrusions, very diagram based, very dimensionally based. This is intended to work in free space. So how it functions, T-splines, is think of everything as a big net. There's a different types called NURBS. It's a different acronym for a different modeling process. It's very similar, but we're going to ignore that for now because what we're working with is called T-splines, surface modeling through control points. Think of your standard fit point spline. You are essentially creating dots, and the spline line is created between those dots. We've worked with it in a loft term where you're creating profiles, and that could be rectangular, and it creates a surface body that transitions from that circle to that square and so on. Now we're working with an entire plane surface. You can take any of these points or the entire thing as a whole, or the lines in between, and manipulate those. Now, of course, you can isolate these. And just so you know, as far as if it's itching in your head, it's called T-splines because they end in a T. It's very clever. And ultimately, the whole thing is that they end in T's. That's why it's called a T-spline. Whatever, doesn't matter. But the point being that you can take these points, take one, drag it upward, the whole thing will reshape. You can push it down, maneuver it. You can take multiples of these, take the whole thing up. You can literally extrude upward and take that more of as a rectangular shape. Move all around. You can expand and play with this. And we also, of course, have prefab shapes. But I just want you to understand that essentially how this functions, think of it as a net or a sheet of more of like a bed sheet or something. You push down on the bed sheet with a mattress under it, everything starts to curve inward. If you're working more like astrophysics, yeah, the whole space-time thing, and there's a gravity well and yada yada. But we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about sheets of paper or sheets of canvas. Same thing, you pull up, everything moves around. You have multiple points. There's going to be more of a curve point as it goes down and around. That's basically what we're doing. You can isolate those, or you can control the intensity with which the translation goes. Like just like with fit point splines, you had the handlebars that could be built off of these. and you can manipulate the amount of curvature that is based around that. Similar thing here, only you can still control it very individually, but obviously the point is you're not working on a single line, you're working on an entire three-dimensional plane or object. So you have more wide affecting controls. You're not trying to manipulate every single point, or at least not through handlebars and such. So that's all well and good. What the hell does any of this actually mean? Let's switch over to Fusion. All right. So first thing is you've got your standard workspace. So far, we've been working with sketches, extrusions, all this sort of fun. But normally, if we're working a true surface, we'd actually toggle over to the surface workspace. Many of these same tools are the same. We're not doing that. We're still staying in the solids, but we're working with the tool that is the little pink eraser with a little starburst on it. So you mouse over, create form. Changes modes, changes all your tools, just like entering like your sketch workspace and all that such. But you're working from either predetermined shapes or things you can create yourself. Now, one of the things on here is it specifically says use form tools to create and edit history-free bodies by pushing and pulling on vertices and such like that. Again, T-spline modeling. What that means is much like in the sketch workspace, or rather, in contrast to the modeling workspace where you're applying like extrude and fillets and such like that, you would be building items on your timeline. When you're in the sketch workspace, all you have is forward and back, control or command Y, and I suddenly forgot. Z, there we are. That is the control. There is no history recording on this. So what that means is either you finish at the time or you plan to not be able to go back in time with altering your models. You can keep manipulating them, but there is no time. There's no timestamp. There's no history recording, just like in your sketch workspace. You can still keep going back and forth and working on it. You can re-enter and edit the workspace just like Sketchbase, but just like Sketchspace, sorry, there's no individualized recording for that. So just to be aware of that. Hit that button, everything changes. You have still your standard. You can create sketches. You can build directly off of sketches. You have preset models. You have a box, which is not rectangle, it's box. It's very open-ended. You have your plane. You can also create by individual faces, and you have your cylinder, quad ball, and sphere. Why do we have two ball forms? One is sphere, like more of a globe, so you have your longitudinal and latitudinal lines. Quad ball is more of a inflated cube, so it's more like a soccer ball style. It's not actually, but that's more of a liking. It's just broken up into different faces or different quadrants more effectively, if you like. You can, of course, open up, and there's more. There's pipe. There's toroids, again, by face. You can extrude, of course, revolve, sweep, loft, all of these as standard. But you notice that, obviously, the big difference is they're paid. No, I'm just kidding. Is you can control all of these also by the amount of faces it creates. It segments as it moves along, and you can control all of those faces, those vertices, those planes in the same manner as it shows here. All of those are manipulatable by push and pull and a variety of different things. Next, over here, you have your modify. You have your standard ones. Edit form is going to be the most popular one we're going to be using a lot. But as I open this, you'll see there's a whole bunch. And the most effective way I can teach you any of this stuff is to tell you, play with these. Screw around, mess things up, try to find your way back. So play with these. There's so many, and it's the problem with something being very powerful in so much as this is one of the things that Fusion is very good with, unlike a lot of other modeling programs like CAD software. Now, recently they've improved these immensely, but a lot of CAD software that is much more sketch driven is not as good with surface modeling. Fusion actually has a very good surface modeling workspace. Other ones have gotten a lot better, so it's fine. And then your other ones are your symmetries, which I'll explain. And because there's a variety of these, because we're working in three-dimensional space. And then you have your utilities. I'll show you how to work with these. And then you have your other standards, still your construction planes, your inspections, your insert canvas models, all that kind of stuff, and yada, yada. So let's start with just something. So let's start with what is going to instantly be the most confusing, a box. Select there, standard, you select a plane to work from, smack in the middle, and it works like a center rectangle. Just pick something, or you could, of course, enter numerically. I want that to be 150 by 85. There we go. Enter. Now you hit enter, and it automatically creates something. You just click, it'll at least let you tab over to start actually creating dimensionally. But first things first about any of this anyway, how the hell is that a box? That's a squishy rubber eraser. This is how the form workspace default shows things. Now, you can toggle this under the utilities toolbar with the default button of the display mode. Click that and it shows you on the drop down. It just shows different ways of working. Now, this is merely a way to visualize things more simply. And that is going to be one of the most important things to remember. Work simply and then add complexity later. Select this button and you can select obviously the whole thing. And you have different display modes. Standard is such, smooth. The other option on the other side is box display. Now it looks like a box. This is simply showing you that it will display this much more simply, much more architecturally, but it is also computing this as a rounded object. You can see both by the middle option, the control frame. So what this means is that you have more direct visual access to the control points for this weird rounded form, and it will just be displayed as the round form inside. So what I mean by all of this is great. We've created a form, yada, yada, yada. It looks weird. Let's use the edit form space. This allows you to manipulate things, as it says, by faces, edges, or vertices to transform, scale, and rotate. You can do a lot. So select there. Now you have a big complex toolbox. You can, of course, move stuff. Let's deselect anything. Still has the toolbox on. This is going to be how you pick and pull and push and move and twist. There's, of course, other options, but this is how we're going to use it for now. Now, I have left this as display mode with the control box visualized, so you can see in both ways. Ultimately, you have the different modes. You have your selection. Currently, you have your selection filter down here. You can have it by default. You could pick anything. But you can select vertex, and that means you can only select the vertices. Vertexes are, again, where any edges come together. It's just those points. You can move them around by that. You can select by edge, which is just the actual edges. By face, which is by the actual whole quadrant there, or all the things, and you can freely select whatever you please. For the most part, if you're just free sculpting, use all, or I often like to use by vertex. So like I said, these control points make sense when you can just grab one, and then you can freely transform these. Now, let's go over this actual, I just forgot the word for it. Just this whole set of tools here on this gimbal. There we are. Sorry, the word completely fell out of my head. I'd like to call it a gimbal. It's a multi-use tool and a kind of spherical thing. Radiating from the center option is when you mouse over, you see this circle with 3 triangles going outward. These and other tools are your scale tools. The center one allows free movement. Or sorry, the center one is scaling. Sorry, I got that confused. But I'm on a vertex. That doesn't do anything. If I select instead, let me switch to all, and I select instead like a face, and by the center, now it scales openly. Now you still see it's only doing, or it feels like it's only scaling in 2 directions, 2-dimensional, and that's because it is. If you want to select the whole thing, it will, there we go. Now it'll scale uniformly across everything. But just by selecting one vertice, that's all you're going to get. Moving outward, I have these square planes. That's exactly what they are. They are plane lock free transform. What I mean by that is it will only move around, in this case, in the looks like the XZ plane. Change over, YZ plane. Here, XY plane. Doesn't really seem like it's limiting to those, but it actually is. Your scale tools are these bars in between. These let you actually scale a little bit more controlled manner. So you have in either side, it doesn't matter which one, it goes from whiteboards, they don't really erase very well. You have that center one with the triangles. That is your uniform scale, depending on what you selected. Moving out, you have those planes. It's hard to select, show this by here. These are your free transform. Think of it, it is free transform, meaning that it's panning. You're instead of panning your view, you're actually panning the object itself, moving it around only on that plane. These lines on the outside, these both scale, but they scale in those directions. So if I select this face and select that one there, press and hold. Come on. That's not letting me do it. Only scaling in opposite directions there. The curve one is the combo. Scales in both directions. And because we're operating on just this one plane, it's not really doing much. If I had multiples, so let's select a couple things. There we are. Now you can see it really messes with stuff. And then you have the other options is this outline element. I don't know where my other marker went. It's just your orbit tool. It rotates, but it's just in one axis. So around the x-axis, around the z-axis, twist, and then the same for y. Last thing is these arrows. That's just your orthogonal movement. So before, where the planes are for transforming or moving in multiple directions within two planes or within the plane, this is only one direction. So z-axis, x-axis, y-axis. That's all. So you can combine all of these. You can isolate, play. This is how you will manipulate things free transform. Let's cancel all of that. Control the Z. Let me just delete this whole mess. And let's start with something that I can actually work with. So I'm going to create another box. Select there. You see, I can do that. Now I have, as long as I don't hit enter, I can scale up. Now, one of the most important things is, like I said, keep it simple. I did not hit enter, so my toolbox is still available. Unfortunately, you cannot re-access this box. There are ways, but for what we're doing, it's best to just start over with creating it. But you can always scale this up and down and all that such. But one of the most important things is you can see, obviously you have your dimensions, so you can always enter that numerically, but you have your faces, the amount of faces. That's the plane between the edge lines and vertices. When you're working, when you're first starting, and even as you start getting more complex, excuse me, it's much easier to keep things simple. And I'll show you what happens when you add and subtract. You think, all right, I'm going to make something really nice and complex. I need to add a whole bunch of faces. No, this means you have so many more control points to have to deal with. What you can do, keep it simple for now. Go back to 2. From there, you can always add divides. So one of that is insert edge. I can select a face, or more importantly, I select an edge, select that tool, and you see this green line appear. I select more, green line grows. I can add more to either side. And I have a numeric input from 0 to 1, and 0.5 is right in the middle. It's in the middle between the next edge. I select there. Now I've divided that face with more edges. So that's how you can add complexity. So for now, when you're first starting, keep it simple, add complexity as you go. All right, we've this, we've got a starting point. Let's actually manipulate this. Now I switched back to the smooth mode. I actually have grown to like working this way because I can see it more actively. But if you get too complex, it does help a lot to switch back to geometric mode to the more box display, so you can more easily see errors and such. Especially as you get more complex, you might not see, sometimes vertices and such might very slightly cross one another and go the wrong way. And then when you go to finish this, so like in the sketch space, you finish form, like finish sketch, and you'll find errors. It'll kick back errors. That is often, by switching display modes, is often the easiest way to find them. But we'll leave it in smooth mode just so we can see a little more clearly and you get a better sense of what's going on here. All right. So let's go back into edit form and let's show you how to actually move some stuff around. So let's just select a face because I have all all options available to me. I can isolate. The other options you have up here are your translation modes, and all that means is I showed you how all the gimbal tools work. That's just isolating them away. So you can switch out to just your transform modes, just rotations, or just scales. So seeing all of them, you always have everything. Coordinate space is doing just that. It's just showing you, it's just isolating coordinate views because sometimes working in 3 dimensions with 2-dimensional inputs gets very confusing. Because ultimately you have a 3-dimensional object in virtual space. You're trying to move it potentially in 3 different directions, but your controls, like a mouse, only works in 2 dimensions. So it gets confusing. So if you like to work that way, more power to you. Otherwise, something you adjust to. All right. So like I said, you can move stuff in and out. Great. I can start twisting that one side and it starts shaping outward. But what if I actually want to make this symmetrical? All right. Control Z. Now before, when I created this box, there was an option to do this, to just apply symmetry, but let's apply it now because you can always go back. So we cancel out of this. The next tool over is symmetry. We have mirror, which is internally, so mirror one side of the object to the other. Circular is, of course, for a circular object, and or not even circular object necessarily. You can apply it in multiple directions. Mirror duplicate is making a copy, a second body that is mirrored across a plane. So right now it'd be a little bit difficult because I've created this model on the origin point, but you can always work outside. And again, circular is for making multiples around an axis. So it gets more complicated. And then of course you can clear symmetry or you can isolate stuff. So go to mirror symmetry, and right now, like, cool, it's a blank box. What you do is you select one face, and then you select another face, and it will assign symmetry across an area. You see the green line there? It's going to create symmetry across that. What if I don't want that? Deselect, select one there. Now on the other side, now it creates symmetry lengthwise. You can play around with that. So let's select OK. Now when I select that face, go to edit mode, drag outward. Now it does it on both sides. So that's symmetry there. Cool. I can start to manipulate. How do I really start playing with this? The free extrude. If you press and hold Alt and then drag outward, it actually extrudes. Now this is, of course, and on Mac it is Command. Press and hold Command and extrude and move away. This works with the directional keys. So what I've done there is it actually automatically creates a new set of planes and edges and vertices, of course. With that, I can then scale that up and down, make these pointy. I can rotate this, however, keep going. The extrude also works on the planar transform. Press and hold Alt, drag out, and you can start making some real weird stuff real fast. But you can also see, because of how this functions, looking closely, look at how thin that gets from the other side. That's where, let me hit OK for now. That's where, if I'm trying to find if an error shows up, and let's see, let me hit finish form. Okay, it worked, so great. But no, God, no, not delete. Edit. There we are. If you were trying to find, oh crap, it overlapped, switch to display mode and switch to either square or both, and you can see a little bit more clearly how thin that object has suddenly got. And that's how it's easier to fix problems. So like in this mode, gets a little confusing because it feels like I'm looking at an optical illusion. Switch back to edit form. Now I can grab like that vertex and see how thin they are, drag that outward, and it just adds dimension back to everything. So that's where that comes in really handy. So let's switch back to smooth mode. Okay. So there you go. You can start playing with that. Again, you can start moving things up. Well, what about if I want to make a hole? Yep, you can delete faces, and it automatically rounds those faces out. Now, obviously, the best selection would have been, because this kind of sort of starts to look like some kind of a skull. Delete there. Now I got a rounded hole. Yeah, great. Now it looks like an alien buffalo cow. There we are. Kind of sort. I don't know. That's what I see. All right, great. I made a hole. Can I still work with this? Yes, absolutely. You can still manipulate everything. Say you want to just work with the edges there. Let's switch to edges and select one, and it selects just that edge. Double click, and it selects the entire round. I have mirror active, so I'm seeing both sides. All right, now I could scale that up, move it around. I hit that instead of scale it down. Now it's squinty eyes, whatever. You can also close those up. To close, I can go to modify. I still have that edge selected, and go down to fill hole. Pretty straightforward. Now, because it is already default like that, it's going to fill it right back in like it was. But you have a couple of options here. Reduce star is one of the ones, and this just means it's like the minimal amount of edges you can add. Fill star is cool. All right, it's not actually doing anything with this. And collapse. That creates a center point vertex with edges going out. One of the other things is that had created a flat edge. I can click keep creases, and now it'll actually keep it much more of like it was. So let's see, what do we have? There we go. Now there's no vertices or anything in between. Cool, that works. So now that I've created that kind of flat spot and such, what I could do is I could go back to edit form. And let's see here. Let's use the free transform, press and hold Alt, or again, Command if you're on Mac, to extrude. Oops, come on, buddy. Oh, it's not letting me do it. Oh, that's weird. Figures. Fine. Don't let me for, oh, because I have edges selected. Duh. You have to have the face selected. There you go. So I was just trying to create that. Now I could say like scale that down and make some little like pinpoints or something like that. Scale it some more, something to that effect. And you can see how you could very quickly start to create faces or create details and such like that. One of the other options, of course, like I said, is you can create edges. Insert edge. I could select that entire ring there. Now, the problem is it doesn't like to do edges in multiple directions. You kind of have to isolate stuff. So even though it says there, it's not going to create a ring outside. So this is one of the drawbacks there. But you could always isolate stuff and add more to it. So no, that's not going to let me do it. So let's just deselect that. And I could add like up there. Let's move that line to this side. There we go. Yeah, go. Do it. Come on. Uh-oh, it froze it again. Yeah, crash the computer. Pause for. All right, so Fusion crashed. Don't know why. Doesn't matter. Ultimately, that's really the very, very basic introductions to the form workspace. Like I said, the most important thing with form working is play around. Now we're going to get into more detail stuff, and I'm going to try and show you now. But that's essentially where that is. That's essentially the starting points. Play around with the shapes. They are all rounded versions of themselves. You can play with a symmetry. You can add multiple types of symmetry, both internal and external. You can push, pull, actually extrude in and out, delete areas, close them back up, scale everything. We're going to get into also splitting faces up and adding much more detail. But main thing is there's so many little tools to play with. I can't stress enough. The most important thing is, or the best way to learn a lot of this is do that. Just play. Use some of the predetermined shapes, build it start kind of sort of the size and shape you want, and squish and play around from there. That's going to be the best way to work. So best of luck, play around with it, see where it takes you.